Hello, in this tutorial we are going to be looking at implementing our splash state. The splash state will be the first screen, the first state that is shown when the game launches. This is where you would usually have some sort of logo of your company or of your brand, and maybe any other sort of collaboration logos as well. And if you want to do any sort of loading, you could perhaps do that here, and then you would go to the main menu, which we'll be covering in a separate video. As you can see, we have this bit of code that says hash include splash state, and then we do some adding of the initial state, which is the splash state. If we try and run it, it does not work because we haven't implemented the splash state yet, and that's what we're going to be doing in this video. Before we get on to coding anything, you want to download the resources for this game. To get the resources, just go on to our GitHub page, and on the GitHub page you want to go to the Flappy Bird page. Don't worry, there will actually be a link provided with this video, actually with every video in this series, to the GitHub page, so you can just easily access the code and the resources that you require. And if you go to code, you can essentially go to any of the folders except for base code and game engine setup. So if I go to, let's say, state creation, that's where I'm on, and then you go to splash state, just get this resources folder. This is what you want, which has all of the resources that we require. So once you have the resources, you'll want to download that, put that into your project like so, where the rest of your code files are. I've got it right here called resources, as you can see. And with this resources folder, you want to add it to your project. So if you're on Xcode, what you want to do is just do add, actually you want to drag and drop it onto your project. So if I just drag and drop it on like so, and you want to click create folder references, add to targets, and if you click finish, this creates it as a reference. If it's not blue and it's this orange one, you've selected the wrong option. Just make sure you go back in this video a few seconds and select the right option. One last thing, go to your project, build phases, click plus. You want to select copy new copy bundle resources phase, and then in here you want to click plus, select resources, click add, and actually made a little mistake. This should not be copy bundle resources, this should actually be copy file phase. So open that, you want to make sure you selected resources, click plus, resources, add, and what this will do, this will ensure that when we compile that application, your copy of the latest set of resources. If you're on Visual Studio, for example, as long as your resource folder is there, you don't need to do anything else. You should be all good to go. If you really need to, you might need to copy and paste it into the debug or the release folder if you're distributing it. But apart from that, we're ready to start coding. So the first thing that we want to do is create a new file, and this is going to be called definitions. So definitions.hpp. We're going to add it to our target, click create, and in here I'm going to replace all of the contents with hash pragma once, and I'm going to close this all down so it's just everything's easier to see. And I just want to have a look at one thing in my Xcode preferences. Yep, got the right settings so you can see the text, so it's extra large. And I'm going to put hash define screen width. So this definition file is essentially going to have all the basic properties for our application, such as screen width and height, the sort of animation times, the location of all our files. And what this will allow us to do is easily change these at a later date really easily. Instead of having to go throughout our code anywhere that we're using these properties, we can just go to the one file that we know where they all are, which is the definition file, and change something. So if we're updating assets, instead of going through every single file and maybe changing an asset that's used 10 times, we change it in one location and it gets propagated throughout our entire application. So for the width, I'm going to put 768. we're going to do a hash define for the screen height, and this is going to be 1024. And now do a hash define for the splash underscore state underscore showtime. So this is how long we want this splash screen to be visible for before it goes to the main menu. And I'm going to put 3, so it's going to be 3 seconds. And finally we're going to do a hash define splash underscore scene underscore background underscore file path. So this is going to be the file path of our background. So it's going to be resources /res/splash background.png, and if I save that, that's the definition file done. Now we need to create the splash state class. So to do that, just right click, new file. On Visual Studio the process is very similar. Chances are you're familiar with the IDE that you're using, and you can easily just add a header and CPP file accordingly. So if I just select C++ file for Visual Studio, for Xcode, click next. I want to also create a header file, and I'm going to call this splash state.hpp. Just splash state, because you'll create the files accordingly. Make sure you select the target on Xcode, Visual Studio, you'll be all good. And that is it. Now for the creation, in here we'll need to put all our splash state, but before we do that, go to your main.cpp, and in here we want to do hash include, and we are going to be including the definitions file. And the reason we're doing that is we're going to change this to Flappy Bird because that's the name of our game. I'm going to change this to screen height, and I'm missing the quotation marks, hence why it wasn't doing IntelliSense. And if I do screen width, there we go. So if we go into definition and change the size, it will propagate to this particular part of our application that we're using it at the moment. Now if you open up the splash state.hpp, we can implement the splash state header. So just get rid of all of the contents in here, and what we want to do is put a hash pragma once, then hash include SFML /graphics.hpp, hash include state.hpp, because this is going to be a state, it will inherit from the state class. And then we're going to do hash include game.hpp, because we'll be using some of the game data. So it's going to be within the same namespace as everything else, which is Sonar. And we're going to have a class called splash state. And this is going to be get everything from the public state class. And the public methods will be a constructor, which will take the game data ref. It'll be a void init method, and this will be the same structure for all of our state classes. So after initialization, we'll have 3 methods for handling any input and events. We'll have the method for updating the game logic, which will take a single float parameter, which is dt, which is the delta time, aka the time difference between frames, and a draw method as well, which will draw. We'll also take the float dt, and this will draw all of our content. So once you've done that, we can start implementing or start listing the private variable. So the first one is going to be game data ref. So we'll have a local reference to the game data, which has stuff like the window and event system. We're going to have a SF clock, which will allow us to keep track of how much time has passed. Because remember, after 3 seconds, which is what we defined in the the definition file, we will go to the main menu. Then we're going to have a SF texture, and this is simply going to be a texture of our background. Very simple background. We're going to have a SF sprite, which is the actual background sprite. So now that we've created the header file, if you open up your CPP file, we can start implementing it. So if we get rid of all the contents, hash pragma once, and put hash include ss stream, hash include splash state.hpp, hash include definitions .hpp, and then finally we need to do a hash include for the IO stream. And now we're going to do namespace sonar. Close this down so it's easier to see what we're doing, and we just got more real estate to work with in here. First method that we're going to implement is the splash state constructor, splash state, and this takes a parameter of the game data ref data, and this is going to have an automatic assignment to the data reference in our class, and just assign it like so. Now we're going to implement the initialization splash state method, so void splash state init, and in here all we're going to be doing is loading the texture using our asset manager and setting that texture to our background sprite. So to actually load it into our asset manager, just put underscore data, access the asset manager, dot load texture, and put a string name, which is what we'll be using to refer to this texture that we've loaded, and we'll call it splash state background. And we are going to be using the hash definition of the file path, and to set the texture we just do underscore background dot set texture, and then we're going to put this underscore data assets dot get texture now, because we've already loaded it, we just need to retrieve it, and then we put the name, which is splash state background, like so. And now we're just going to put void splash state handle input. So the only input we're going to handle on this particular state is if the window is being closed. So if we click the X button, for example, in the top right, top left, top right is Windows, and I'm going to put SF event, Holy event, while the data window.poll event. So while the event is being polled, we're going to pass in the event variable, and we're going to simply check for the closed event. So SF event closed equals, so if that's the event type that's been triggered, and all we're going to do is data window.close. We will just close the window, and that is it for handling events. Now we're going to update, so this is where we will just check how many seconds have passed. We're going to do void splash state update, and we're going to do float dt, and in here we're going to do if underscore clock dot get elapsed time dot as seconds. If that is greater than the splash state show time, then we will switch to the main menu. For now, all we're going to do is press C out of go to main menu. In the next video, we'll actually implement the main menu state, which will allow us to go to that one. Because it doesn't exist at the moment, we can't do that, but we'll just put a C out, And finally, we need to draw all of this, so we just do void splash state draw float dt. And in here, first thing, we need to do data window dot clear. So we need to clear the screen like so. You can provide a color variable in here if you want to, but we're not going to be seeing the background because we have our own background texture, which will cover all of the screen. Then we're going to do underscore data. Now we need to draw our background. So we do window.draw, and you pass in the background like so. Now you put data window.display. So we will display the content that we've drawn. And what I'm going to do is not maximize it so we can actually see the console. So if I run this now, open up the console, actually I'll rerun it so you can see it a little better. As you can see, there is nothing in the console. After 3 seconds, it keeps saying go to main menu. You wouldn't have this many logs because this would only get triggered once, and after it gets triggered, you would go to the main menu and the splash state would cease to exist. Another thing that I would like to mention is because we've implemented this splash state now and we have a file called splash state, if we go to our game.cpp, the error that was on line 2 that was saying splash state doesn't exist is now gone, and the add-in of that state class has also gone because we've actually implemented that now. So we're all ready to start coding our application. In the next video, we're going to be covering implementing the main menu. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on my educational platform, sonarlearning.co.uk. There will be a link to that with this video. Alongside that, there will be a link to GitHub where you can get the resources and the source code from. If you have any questions, like I said, just feel free to ask. And as usual, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.